They say it happened in a blink, but that's not how I remember it. What I remember is the stillness, that strange, weightless quiet that settled just before everything tipped sideways. The sun was out. Birds were chirping. Someone's kid laughed too loud and a balloon slipped free into the trees. Then came the silence. The kind that doesn't settle, it swallows. I didn't know then that it would be the last time I ever saw my sister's face as a child, and I didn't know yet that I would spend the next 15 years trying to bring her home. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments and hit that like and subscribe if stories like this have ever touched your town or your life. Every click helps make sure people like Sarah aren't forgotten. I was 12 that summer. My name's Jessica Warren, and I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, the kind of place where you still waved at your neighbors and left your front door unlocked until it got dark. My mom stayed home with us. My dad worked maintenance for the school district. We weren't rich or anything, but we had routine, and back then that felt like enough. Saturdays were always for the park. We'd load up the wicker basket, the checkered blanket, and head to Alton Baker by the river. The air always smelled like pine and cut grass, sometimes campfire if the wind shifted just right. That weekend was no different. Early June, warm, no clouds. We spread out near the clearing where the trees opened up just enough to let the sun fall across the grass like gold. Sarah was 8. She'd been begging all week for a balloon, and finally got one at the corner gas station that morning, cherry red tied to her wrist like a prize. She wore this white cotton dress with little yellow daisies stitched along the hem. My mom made it. It already had grass stains by the time we unwrapped the sandwiches. I was reading some paperback I can't even remember now. Sitting cross-legged on the blanket, half listening to the radio, static and country music. My dad fiddled with the antenna while my mom hummed and tried not to crush the deviled eggs. I looked up every now and then, mostly when Sarah squealed. She was darting around like she always did, loud, barefoot, happy. She had this habit of chasing shadows or following the balloon like it was leading her somewhere. Always curious, always wandering a little too far. I must have called out half a dozen times that morning, Sarah not too close to the trees. She'd glance back, grin like she knew better, then turn right back toward the woods, that edge of the forest. It always made me nervous, even then. Thick trees, no real trail, just brush and shadows. A wall of green that never looked quite friendly. My parents always told us to stay close, but kids don't listen. Not really. And that morning I remember something else too, a smell. Just a wisp like wood smoke or something burning deep in the trees. Not strong, but it made me look up. I saw Sarah stop too. She tilted her head, tugged at the balloon string, and just stared. Right into the trees. Like something had whispered her name. The thing is, it didn't feel like anything at the time. That's what stays with me. How normal it all seemed. How unremarkable that exact moment felt, and how much I'd give now to go back and say something louder or stand up or follow her anything. But I didn't. I just went back to my book, and when I looked up again, she was gone. When I looked up again and saw nothing but grass and trees, I didn't panic right away. I called her name soft at first, more like a check-in than an alarm. Sarah. No answer. I set my book down. The picnic still buzzed behind me, my dad swearing quietly at the radio, my mom arranging sandwiches like she always did, one hand wiping down the edge of the blanket, fussing over nothing. I stood up, shaded my eyes. The sun was higher now, making the forest edge look darker than it had earlier, like the trees had shifted closer without anyone noticing. I took a few steps forward, squinting, scanning the clearing. No red balloon, no white dress. Just a low hush, like the kind that settles when a storm's about to roll in. I turned back to the blanket. Mom. She looked up, her face still caught in that easy summer smile. Where's Sarah? I asked. The smile faded like someone had flipped a switch. She followed my eyes to the tree line. I could see the question forming in her head. Wasn't she just there? My dad was already standing. He dropped the radio in the grass without a word and cupped his hands to his mouth. Sarah, he called louder than I'd expected. My mom's voice came next, sharper. Sarah, honey. Come on back now. Still nothing. The woods held their silence. The balloon string was the first thing I saw dangling from a low branch red ribbon, twisting in the breeze, like it was waving goodbye. That's when everything around us just cracked. Plates tipped over. The wicker basket spilled onto the grass. I remember my mom stepping into the clearing barefoot, not even noticing she'd left her shoes behind. My dad stomped down into the brush, calling her name over and over. I ran too, even though I didn't know where to start. The ground was soft from the week's rain, but not soft enough to hold prints. Just damp needles, leaves, and shadows. We searched for hours. That same stretch of woods back and forth, calling until our throats were raw. By early evening, the police had arrived. Flashlights lit the trees, and yellow tape was strung between the branches like some kind of cruel decoration. My dad's hands wouldn't stop shaking. My mom kept saying her name over and over, Sarah, 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 like she could will her into being again. I sat on the back of an ambulance, knees scratched, holding the necklace I'd been wearing since my birthday, the one Sarah always liked to borrow. I don't know why I took it off. I just remember gripping it so hard the chain left marks in my palm. The sun went down and still no sign. No footprints, no torn fabric, no cry for help. 1 second, she was there, bright, loud, laughing, and the next it was like she'd been erased. Over the next few days, the park was combed with dogs and volunteers. Flyers were printed. Local news anchors said her name like they were reading it off a script. My parents gave statements tearful and shaky. I watched it all like I was floating a few inches above my own body. At night, I'd lie in bed listening to my mom cry through the wall, my dad pacing the hallway like he didn't know where to go. I stayed silent. I think I was afraid that if I said her name out loud, it would make it real that she was actually gone. A few weeks later, the police scaled the search back. They said there wasn't enough to keep going at the same pace, that they'd follow up on tips, but we should prepare for the possibility that she'd wandered off and gotten lost. I still remember how the detective said it'd gotten lost, like she was a set of car keys or a misplaced wallet. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. My parents nodded too. Everyone just nodded and nodded like that made it acceptable. After that, people moved on. The town needed to. One day there were missing posters on every streetlight. The next, they were gone, taken down or weathered into pulp. School started up again. Neighbors brought over casseroles. My mom left the picnic basket in the garage and never touched it again. The checkered blanket stayed folded on the shelf, smelling like dirt and old grass. I tried to fall back into the rhythm of being a kid, but everything was offbeat. The park, the radio, even the smell of cut pine made my chest tighten. And the weirdest part was how quickly people stopped talking about her. I'd walk past a group of parents at the store and hear their voices dip just slightly when they saw me. My classmates looked at me like I was a ghost, or worse, like I was supposed to be a symbol of something and they didn't know what. At home, we got quieter. My dad stayed at work longer. My mom started attending church again. And me, I started writing things down. Not whole sentences at first, just names, places, descriptions. Like if I could capture every detail of that day, maybe I could spot the thing we missed. The one clue that would make it all make sense. Because I knew my sister. I knew she didn't just wander off. And I knew that silence, the one that wrapped around us like a shroud, wasn't natural. It was hiding something. And whatever it was, it had taken her. I started sleeping with the window shut even in the heat. The balloon string had disappeared from the tree after a few days. Maybe it blew away. Maybe someone took it. But I kept seeing it in my head, that ribbon twisting in the air, bright red against all that green, like it was marking the spot where everything we knew just unraveled. And I remember this too, one afternoon, maybe 3 weeks after I came home from school and found my mom sitting at the kitchen table holding Sarah's dress in her lap. She was running her fingers over the little daisy stitches like she was trying to memorize the pattern. She looked up at me and said, "I still hear her laugh sometimes." That's when I realized we weren't waiting for Sarah to come home. We were just waiting to forget the sound of her voice. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not then. Not now. Because deep down, even at 12, I felt it, whatever took Sarah hadn't meant for her to be found. And I didn't know it yet, but it would take me 15 years to prove them all wrong. The first time I brought up the idea that Sarah hadn't just wandered off, the officer sitting across from me gave me a look I'll never forget. It wasn't cruel exactly, but it was that kind of smile people give when they've already made up their mind. He tapped his pen on the edge of the notepad and said, "Sometimes they get curious. That's all it takes." I remember staring at him, not answering, just trying to hold in the heat building in my chest. My sister was 8. She didn't go far without asking. She didn't like bugs. She didn't like getting her dress dirty. She wasn't the kind of kid who'd vanish into the woods on a whim. But every time I said that to the police, to the search team, to teachers or neighbors or reporters, I got the same response, a tilt of the head, a sigh, a gentle hand on the shoulder. Grief makes people see what they want to see, they'd say. It wasn't that they thought I was lying. They just thought I was too close to see straight. And maybe I was, but not in the way they meant. That first year was the worst. People started dropping off around us, friends, extended family, even the volunteers. Everyone meant well, I think, but after a while they stopped asking. Nobody wanted to reopen the wound. My parents tried to hold it together. My dad worked longer shifts, took up weekend jobs to keep busy. My mom threw herself into her church, into housework, into anything that kept her hands moving. But when it was just us in the kitchen, when the house got quiet at night, it was like Sarah's absence filled every space. I tried to talk about her, just little things at first. Remember how she used to, or she would have loved this. My mom would nod, smile a little, then change the subject. My dad would just get up and leave the room. I guess we all had different ways of not drowning. I started keeping notes in the back of my school binders. At first it was just lists, what Sarah had been wearing, who we saw at the park that day, what time we got there. I wrote down every detail I could remember, even things that didn't seem important. Later, I copied down articles, tips that came in through the local hotline, anything that hinted at a girl spotted near the highway or a woman who looked too old to be walking with a child that young. Most of them were dead ends. Some weren't even close. But I kept them. I kept everything. I think part of me believed that if I could just get someone to see it the way I saw it, they'd help. They'd dig deeper. But I learned pretty quickly that people get tired of tragedy they can't fix. In high school, one of my teachers pulled me aside after class. He said he was concerned. I wasn't turning in assignments. I was distant. I told him I was just tired, but he'd already spoken to the counselor. They thought I should talk to someone. Maybe try letting go. He didn't say Sarah's name, but I knew what he meant. Let go. As if I'd been holding on too tightly to something everyone else had already buried. So I nodded, said I'd think about it, and went back to doing what I'd always done, keeping quiet. Watching. Writing. By the time I turned 20, I'd already decided I wasn't going to be the girl whose sister disappeared. I didn't want that to be the only thing people knew about me. So I moved out. Got a tiny studio near downtown and enrolled in the journalism program at the community college. Most people assumed I picked that major because I liked writing. That was part of it. But really, I wanted to learn how to ask questions the right way, how to make people listen. I figured if I could just learn the right method, the right tone, the right kind of persistence, someone might finally give me a real answer. The professors liked my work mostly. I did well on the investigative stuff, the pieces that had structure and facts and records to chase down. But any time we got an open-ended assignment, I'd end up writing about Sarah. Not directly, not by name. But there was always a girl missing, or a family who didn't believe what they were told, or a witness who saw something no one else took seriously. One professor asked if I'd ever considered doing a personal essay about it. I told him no. That wasn't the point. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted clarity. I'd show up at town hall meetings with a notebook and recorder, listen for any mention of public land projects, construction permits, private properties being cleared near the forest. Most of it led nowhere, but every so often I'd overhear something that felt off a patch of woods with fencing that wasn't there before, or complaints about old trails being blocked off without explanation. I followed those threads the same way I'd followed my own thoughts since I was 12, slowly, carefully, not trusting anyone to care as much as I did. And even when someone did care, even when they said the right things, it never went far. I called the lead detective on Sarah's case 3 different times over the years. Each time I gave him something new, a report, a map, a potential sighting. He thanked me, told me they'd follow up, and then nothing. I'd check in a month later and they'd already moved on. We didn't find anything credible, they'd say. Or worse. There's no new evidence to reopen the file. The worst was the summer I was 25. A woman in Medford claimed she'd seen a girl matching Sarah's age and description at a rest stop. The girl seemed out of it, confused, maybe drugged. I drove down that same night, met with a local officer, gave them a copy of Sarah's picture and one of the flyers I still kept in the glove box. The officer looked half asleep. Said he'd pass it along. I never heard another word. That's the thing no one tells you about being the one who remembers. It's not just the pain, it's the erosion. Year after year, people start treating it like a memory problem. Like maybe you misheard. Maybe you don't quite recall the way it happened. And if you keep insisting otherwise, well, then maybe you're the problem. But I knew. I always knew. My sister didn't wander off. She didn't get lost. She didn't just vanish because the world is cruel and random. Someone took her. And the longer I kept digging, the more I realized that the silence wasn't just grief. It was protection. It was complicity. And whether they meant to or not, a whole lot of people had chosen to stop looking. That's why when Daniel called me that afternoon after all those years, I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask him to explain over the phone. I just grabbed my notebook, got in the car, and drove straight to that cafe. Because if there was even a sliver of truth in what he'd found, I wasn't going to let anyone shut me out again. Not this time. Daniel had always been the quiet kid growing up smart, awkward in a way that made teachers love him and other kids ignore him. Back then, he was always building something out of spare parts, little circuits and toy robots, disassembling radios just to see if he could put them back together. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not really. A wave here and there when I passed his parents' house on the way to the store. So when his name lit up on my phone, it didn't feel casual. I picked up and he said my name like it didn't quite fit in his mouth anymore. Then he said, "I think I found something. That's all it took." I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys, my notebook, and drove to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. When I walked in, he already had the laptop open. I could tell by the look on his face that this wasn't a social visit. No small talk, no awkward hug. He just turned the screen toward me and hit play. The video was rough, choppy aerial footage taken from a drone gliding low over a stretch of forest that looked too familiar. I leaned in. Trees passed beneath the camera, thick with moss and shade. Then about 30 seconds in the frame jolted. The camera had paused on a clearing, and there, just for a second, was a figure. Thin, still, looking straight up at the drone. Her face was half-shadowed hair, tangled clothes barely hanging on. But something about the way she stood, the shape of her shoulders, the tilt of her head hit me hard. I stared at that frame until it burned behind my eyes. "Where was this?" I asked. Daniel looked down. "Willilt National Forest. About 6 miles past the old ranger station. I nodded slowly. When yesterday? I watched the clip again, and again. I don't know how many times. I kept telling myself it could be anyone, a hiker, someone camping illegally, even a prank. But the longer I watched, the more I felt it. That stillness, that look in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't surprise. It was something else, like recognition. I whispered her name, barely audible. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We drove out the next day. The air was colder than I expected, heavy with the smell of cedar and wet leaves. The trees were older out there, their roots like knuckles pushing up through the soil. Daniel carried his gear on his back drone, packed tight in a black case with cracked handles. I carried my notebook and a flashlight. We walked in mostly silence. There wasn't much to say. The further we got, the more it felt like the woods were pressing in around us. I kept watching the light shift through the branches, trying not to look for shapes between the trees. About an hour in, Daniel stopped walking. He knelt down near a patch of soft ground, brushed away a layer of pine needles, and pointed. Footprints. Bare. Small. The arches narrow, and the toes splayed slightly. I crouched beside him and stared. They were fresh, still damp from the soil. My breath caught. I didn't speak. I just followed where they led. They stopped at a tree, tall and gnarled bark split in jagged lines like old scars. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. He hadn't mentioned it before. Inside were printouts, stills from other flights he'd done. He flipped through them slowly. Smudges, marks on trunks, scratches that looked random at first, until they didn't. On one of them, faint but real, were 2 letters carved into bark, SM. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My hand trembled when I touched the grooves. It felt like touching a ghost. I looked at Daniel and asked, "Why didn't you show me this before?" He kept his eyes on the folder. Because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to be another person giving you false hope. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. I nodded once. That was fair. We followed the prints a little further. They curved down into a shallow ravine. The moss grew thicker there, muffling our steps. The forest went quiet, too quiet. Even the birds had gone still. Then we saw it. Another tree older than the first. Its trunk carved with rows and rows of tally marks, maybe 50 or more, all etched deep into the wood, like someone had used a nail or a shard of stone. Each one the same length, the same pressure. At the base, written in uneven lettering, were 2 words. Still here. My chest tightened. I reached out and touched the letters with my fingertips slowly, like it might disappear if I blinked. That didn't feel like a message for the world. That felt personal, like she was waiting. Daniel launched the drone again, this time higher. We watched the screen together, eyes locked on the flicker of movement between branches. There, just past the next clearing, something shifted, too fast to catch clearly, but unmistakable. A person. Moving, then gone. Daniel rewound, slowed it down. Frame by frame, we watched a figure step from one tree to another. Long hair, thin arms, clothes barely hanging on. Before she vanished, she turned slightly, and even through the blur, I saw the shape of her eyes. I had to brace myself against the tree. The forest spun. The tallies, the letters, the bare footprints, the movement. It was too much to hold all at once. But Daniel said what I couldn't. If that's her. Jess, if she's still out here. I nodded. Then she's been living in this, surviving in this. And I knew I wasn't leaving without finding her. We didn't go home that night. We stayed in the forest, set up a small camp near the ravine. I didn't sleep. Every sound in the dark made me sit up alert, waiting. I kept replaying the drone footage over and over, zooming in on every blurry line, filling in the gaps with memory, the slope of her jaw, the tilt of her chin. Could that kind of survival really carve out such a familiar silhouette? Or was I just seeing what I needed to see? By morning, the doubt had faded. The evidence was too much. I added new sketches to my notebook, the carvings, the footprints, the layout of the land. Every detail recorded and dated. It wasn't a case file yet, but it would be. Daniel poured coffee into a tin mug and asked, "What's the plan?" I didn't answer right away. I was staring at the words carved into that tree. Still here. That wasn't desperation. That was a message, not to the world, to me. We broke camp after sunrise and headed deeper. Following faint signs, snapped branches, slight clearings, a rusted tin can near an old tree. And just before the path curved again, I saw it, a strip of fabric, weathered and torn, snagged on a branch. Daisies, yellow and white, the same pattern that had been on Sarah's dress. My knees gave a little. I took it gently in both hands and folded it into my notebook like it was made of glass. This wasn't a hiker. This wasn't a drifter. Someone had lived here. Someone had stayed hidden. And someone had left signs not by accident. A footprint, a carving, a scrap of cloth. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just remembering my sister. I was following her. The strip of fabric stayed in my hand for a long time before I could fold it up. Even weathered and sun-faded, the pattern was clear, little yellow daisies scattered across pale cotton. My mom had sewn that dress herself. I could still see Sarah twirling in it that morning, her bare feet streaked green from the grass, the red balloon bouncing above her. Now here it was, 15 years later, snagged on a branch in the middle of nowhere. The weight of that moment didn't hit all at once. It came slow in the texture of the fabric and the smell of wood smoke that hadn't fully cleared in the way Daniel stood just behind me, silent, like he knew words would only get in the way. We didn't talk much after that. We just kept going. The trail got narrower, more overgrown. It wasn't a hiking path, not one that had been cleared by anyone official. But someone had moved through there recently. Branches had been clipped. Moss scraped off bark at just the right height for a shoulder or elbow. Every few feet I'd see something that didn't quite belong, a rusted bucket near the base of a tree, an old can flattened by heel or boot. Then we found the fire pit. Shallow, mostly ash, but with just enough warmth left that I knew it had been used no more than a day or two earlier. I knelt beside it, touched the edge. Still dry underneath, which meant someone had covered it when they left. Someone who knew what they were doing. Daniel scanned the area with his drone controller pressed tight to his chest. "There's movement back west," he said, "about 100 yards off." I didn't ask what kind of movement. We were past that now. I started to see things differently as we moved deeper. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was design, care, a rhythm. Someone had been living out here, not drifting. A tin cup tucked under the roots of an oak. A pile of leaves shaped just enough to be bedding. A narrow strip of path where the grass had been trampled consistently, always in one direction. It was quiet, but not abandoned. And then we found the stones. There were about 10 of them stacked in a small circle no wider than a dinner plate. Not just piled, placed. Intentional. And in the middle sat a carved horse about the length of my hand, worn smooth from time and weather. My heart stopped. I knew that horse. My grandfather made it the summer before he died. Whittled it from a chunk of pine while Sarah sat on his porch steps and watched. She carried it with her for months. It had gone missing the day she disappeared. I picked it up slowly. One of the legs had splintered, but the shape was still there. I turned it over in my hand and felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. It hadn't been lost. It had been brought here. Carried. Protected. Daniel stood behind me, his voice low. "Jess, if she left this here, it's not just a sign. It's a message." I nodded. I already knew. Sarah wasn't just alive. She was trying to be found. But everything changed when we got to the creek. There, in the soft mud along the water's edge, were more footprints. Hers again, the narrow arches, the way the toes splayed slightly inward. But beside them was something else. Larger prints. Booted. Adult. They didn't follow hers. They circled them, like someone watching, someone pacing. My chest went tight. I pointed at the ground, my voice rough. "She's not alone." Daniel crouched beside me, studying the tread. Same person he asked quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't want to speak it yet. The idea that someone had been out here with her, not helping but keeping, made the forest around us feel smaller, more dangerous. My mind jumped backward all those years of wondering if she was lost, if she was trapped, if someone was keeping her quiet. This wasn't a guess anymore. It was right here in the dirt. We left the woods just after dusk. It was the first time I'd felt fear since we came out. Not of the trees or the dark, but of what this all meant. If Sarah was being kept hidden, it wasn't by accident. Someone had chosen this. And maybe she hadn't had the power to leave on her own. I needed to see the evidence all at once to lay it out flat. Back at my apartment, I cleared the table and spread everything out: the photo prints, the scrap of her dress, the carved horse, the notes I'd scribbled in my notebook since the first sighting. It formed a story, and it wasn't the one we'd been told for 15 years. Sarah hadn't vanished. She'd been taken, and someone had made sure she stayed gone. I was still staring at the table when I heard the knock at the door. It was my mom. I hadn't called her. I hadn't told anyone where we'd been. She looked older than I remembered, the kind of tired that doesn't come from sleep. Her eyes landed on the daisy fabric first. She stepped forward slowly, like if she moved too fast it might disappear. Her fingers touched the edge, and she froze. "That's her dress," she whispered. "I remember stitching those flowers. She wore it the day—" She trailed off. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. She ran her thumb across the edge of the cloth and started crying quiet without sound. After a while, she looked up at me and said, "There's something I never told you." She sat down across from me and folded her hands. "That day at the park, she began your Uncle Greg was there." I felt something shift in my stomach. I didn't think anything of it. He said he was just taking a walk in the woods, needed a break from the noise. When Sarah went missing, he helped us search. He told the police he hadn't seen anything. I waited. I didn't think twice at the time. But looking back, I don't know. I always felt like something was off. Her voice cracked. I didn't want to believe it. So I didn't say anything. I sat there for a long time before speaking. He's the one who stayed close after I said. Came over to help. Fixed the fence. Mowed your lawn. She nodded. He never stopped coming around. My thoughts raced the size of the boot prints, the steady presence at holidays, the man who always stayed quiet when everyone else cried. I reached for the photo of the carved horse, held it up. He would have known about this. My mom didn't speak. She just kept her eyes on the fabric like she was waiting for it to say something she couldn't. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the table going over everything again and again until a new map started forming in my head. The trail wasn't just Sarah's. It was his, too. Whoever had kept her out there wasn't a stranger. He'd been part of our lives all along, and now that I could see the pattern, I couldn't look away. I had the dress, the horse, the carvings, the prints, and now, for the first time, I had a name. And if I was right, that meant she wasn't just surviving out there. She was waiting for someone to find her, and I wasn't going to let her wait alone. Daniel met me at the trailhead before sunrise. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a flashlight and opened the back of his SUV where the drone case was already unzipped. The air had that cold, damp stillness you only get in deep woods before the day wakes up, the kind that makes every step feel louder than it should. I hadn't told my mom where I was going. I think she knew not to ask. The look on her face the night before when she touched that scrap of Sarah's dress, when she said Gregory's name out loud, told me everything I needed. There wasn't going to be a clean way forward, just a choice. And I had already made it. We moved quickly, retracing the same stretch of forest Daniel had mapped with the drone 2 days earlier. The tree with the tallies was still there, still damp with early dew. The creek hadn't risen much, and the boot prints along the bank hadn't washed out. I followed them with my eyes, not my feet. I didn't want to disturb what they were trying to tell me. They cut off suddenly, not because the trail ended, but because the earth turned dry. Higher ground. Rockier. That's when I saw it. Ivy thick and twisted, climbing up what I thought at first was another outcropping of stone. But when the light shifted through the trees, I saw angles that didn't belong in nature corners, boards a low roof. A cabin. It was half sunken into the slope, almost hidden. If we hadn't come from the direction we had, we might have walked right past it. Daniel crouched beside me, squinting through the brush. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" he said. I didn't answer. I just nodded. There was smoke rising from the chimney, faint but steady. Someone was home. We stayed down, barely breathing. I scanned the perimeter. There was a clothesline strung between 2 trees, sagging under the weight of threadbare fabric, a stack of chopped wood, a rusted metal bucket full of rainwater, everything arranged with quiet purpose. I pulled out the binoculars Daniel had packed and moved them slowly across the face of the cabin. One of the windows had been boarded from the inside, but there was a small crack between 2 planks. I adjusted the lens. That's when I saw her. She was standing behind the glass just far enough back that most people would have missed her. Her hair was long tangled. Her eyes locked onto the window like she'd been waiting. Her hand rose slowly and pressed against the wood, fingers slipping into the gap. My throat tightened. I whispered her name. Sarah. Daniel didn't speak. I think he knew it too. That wasn't a maybe. That was her. We stayed frozen, half hidden in the undergrowth, afraid to move too quickly. Then the door creaked open. My body went still. A man stepped out. Heavy boots, shoulders hunched. Older now, but unmistakable. Gregory. He walked across the porch like it belonged to him, picked up an axe, began splitting wood with the slow, practiced rhythm of someone who'd been doing it for years. I could feel Daniel watching me. I kept my eyes on Gregory. Every motion was deliberate, every move quiet. No panic, no fear. Just routine. That's what shook me most. He didn't look like someone hiding a crime. He looked like someone who thought no one would ever come. We pulled back slowly, staying low until we were out of sight. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Daniel was already rolling footage from the drone. It had captured everything: the cabin, the smoke, the shadow in the window. I leaned over his shoulder and watched the playback frame by frame. You could see her face. Not clearly, but enough. Then I saw something else. On the inside edge of the window, just before she stepped back, were faint scratches. I paused the video, zoomed in. They weren't random. They were letters. JM. My initials. I stared at them, not blinking. She hadn't just remembered me. She'd carved it. Into the wood. Proof. Sarah had held on. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat at my kitchen table replaying every second of that video, writing down every angle, every timestamp, every piece of that cabin that could help explain how this had happened and why. Daniel texted me twice, said we needed to go to the police. I didn't reply, not because he was wrong, but because I knew how this would go. I'd been through it too many times. If we handed it over now, they'd take the footage, secure the site, put up tape, maybe bring her in. But I'd be on the outside again, just the sister, just the one who never let go. And I couldn't risk that. Not until I saw her again face to face. By morning, we had a plan. Not a good one, but a plan. We'd go back, document everything, try to make contact without drawing attention. We packed light, just enough food, 2 battery packs, Daniel's backup drone, and a soft blanket rolled tight in my backpack. I don't know why I brought the blanket. I think it made me feel like I was doing something. Like I could give her warmth if nothing else. The forest looked different that second morning. Not darker, but closer. We approached from the opposite side, circling wide to avoid the view from the cabin. Daniel flew the drone high this time, capturing overhead footage while I moved slowly through the trees. I reached the edge of the clearing and crouched low. The window was still cracked. The smoke was lighter now, maybe just embers inside. I waited. Nothing. Then I whispered her name. Sarah. No movement. I tried again. Louder. Sarah, it's Jess. I'm here. A shift. Just behind the glass, a shadow. Her face appeared again, thinner than I remembered, but still hers. She pressed her hand against the crack. I did the same. Wood between us, but nothing else. Her lips moved. No sound. I leaned closer. She mouthed it again. He's here. Then the door creaked. I dropped down fast, heart slamming in my chest. Gregory stepped onto the porch again. Same rhythm, same stillness. But this time he looked around longer, like something had changed, like he'd felt it. I stayed frozen. Daniel was behind a tree 10 feet to my left, holding his breath. Gregory stepped down the stairs and walked toward the stack of wood axe in hand. I didn't wait. I backed away slowly, motioning to Daniel, my mouth barely moving. We need to go. Back at the car, neither of us spoke. The drone was still recording. We let it hover over the cabin until the signal started breaking. On the screen, just before the feed cut out, I saw her again. Sarah. Standing by the window, her hand still against the glass. I knew then we couldn't wait much longer. He'd felt the shift. He'd seen the signs. And if he thought someone was coming, if he knew we were close, I didn't know what he'd do next. But I wasn't about to let him take her away again. Not now. Not when she'd left a trail for me to follow. Not when I was finally standing on the other side of the glass. We didn't wait another day. After we left the woods that second time, I knew I couldn't stand in the doorway of this any longer. I had seen her face. She had seen mine. That kind of moment doesn't just happen and get ignored. So we packed quickly before doubt could catch up. Daniel pulled footage labeled folders, transferred backups to a second drive. I wrote everything down, the initials on the window, the time of day, the order Gregory chopped firewood. Not because we'd forget, but because if anything went wrong, someone else would need the truth laid out clean. We left before dawn again. Didn't speak much on the drive. The forest looked different in the rearview mirror, not looming, not ominous, just inevitable. There was no version of this where I stayed home and waited. Not anymore. We parked the car off the road nearly a mile from the trail, hiked the rest in silence, slower this time. I kept one hand on my bag where I'd packed the photos and that same blanket from the day before. I didn't think I'd need it. I just wanted to bring something soft into whatever came next. The closer we got, the heavier the air felt, not from weather, but from knowing what was about to happen. I had spent half my life walking toward this moment, and suddenly every sound was sharper. Every step was louder than I wanted it to be. Daniel stopped at the edge of the ravine. The roof of the cabin peeked through the trees, smoke still curling up through the same crooked chimney. He turned to me. "We do this fast," he said. I nodded, but I couldn't answer. We circled wide again, keeping to the shadows. I led the way to the window where I'd seen her. The crack in the boards was still there. I whispered her name, soft but close. Sarah. Nothing. Then movement. A shift in the dark. Her face appeared pale and close to the wood, her eyes wide. Her lips moved without sound. I pressed my hand against the gap. "It's me," I said. "I'm here." She reached up, touched the edge of the same board, and for 1 second we were both 12 again on either side of the same bedroom wall, whispering secrets we thought no one could hear. Then she shook her head, frantic. Her mouth moved again, slower this time. "He's here." And that's when the floor creaked. We ducked down fast. I pressed my back to the side of the cabin. Boots moved inside. I could hear them. One step, then another. A pause. Then the door opened with that same aching sound. I saw his shadow stretch across the porch before I saw him. Gregory stepped outside like he had every right to. He didn't carry a weapon. Just a mug in his hand, steam rising in the cold. His eyes scanned the woods. Not in a panic, just calm, suspicious, practiced. Like a man who'd spent a long time knowing exactly when something was out of place. Daniel grabbed my wrist. "We can't wait," he whispered. "He'll never let her go." I nodded. My legs moved before my mind caught up. We circled around the back where the boards were weaker. Daniel pulled out a small crowbar. I steadied the wood with both hands, barely breathing as he pried at the edge. The nail gave with a low groan. I froze. Waited. No footsteps. No voice. He kept going. One board loosened, then another. Through the gap I saw her face again. Closer now. Her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Not fear, not relief, just stunned disbelief. She stepped forward. I reached in, took her hand. "Come on," I said. She crawled through slow, cautious. Her body was smaller than I remembered. Fragile. But when I wrapped my arms around her, I could feel its warmth. Wait. She was real. She was alive. She buried her face in my shoulder and whispered, "I knew you'd come." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat locked. I just held her tighter. We only made it a few steps before everything snapped. The wood chopping stopped. No birds, no breeze. Just silence. Then heavy boots on the porch. Fast. The door slammed open. Gregory's voice cut through the trees, sharp and furious. "Sarah." We ran. I didn't look back. Daniel was behind us, pushing branches out of the way. Sarah held my hand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Roots caught at our shoes. Twigs scraped our arms. I didn't care. We moved fast. Fast enough to hear him shouting behind us. Fast enough to know he was close, but not fast enough to outrun the sound of him crashing through the brush. Then just ahead. Headlights. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, parked at the clearing. Officers stepped forward, guns drawn, voices calm but firm. Daniel had called them earlier, just in case. I hadn't wanted to count on that. But when I saw those uniforms, the tight coil in my chest finally let go. One officer moved toward us. I handed Sarah to him without a word. Her body trembled. She clung to my arm until they gently eased her into the back seat. She looked up at me one more time. I mouthed it. "You're safe." She nodded. Gregory burst into the clearing seconds later, his hands out, mouth already forming a lie. But the officers didn't wait. They ordered him to the ground. He didn't resist. Didn't say a word. Just stared at me like he was trying to remember who I was, or maybe wondering how I'd figured it out. The cuffs clicked, and for the first time in 15 years, his control ended. I stood there watching as they walked him to the cruiser, his boots leaving prints in the soft dirt. An officer came to ask questions. I gave short answers. Names, time, location, Sarah's condition. They nodded, scribbled, radioed it in. I kept my eyes on the window of the squad car where she sat. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. Just stared ahead, her face blank. But when the car started to pull away, she turned her head and met my eyes through the glass. Later that night in the ER waiting room after the questions and the processing and the paperwork, she whispered something I still haven't forgotten. She said I kept count every year. I thought maybe you forgot. I sat beside her and took her hand. Never, I said. Not one day. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't been able to admit until then, that even though we had her back, even though he was gone, the real work hadn't even started. But at least now she wouldn't have to face it alone. Tomorrow, we'd begin the rest of it. But tonight, we had her. And she was free. The first time Sarah was asked if she wanted to press charges, she didn't answer right away. The question hung there in the quiet, sterile light of the exam room, somewhere between the doctor's final notes and the intake nurse's signature on the clipboard. Her fingers were curled around the hem of the hospital blanket, white knuckles showing just above her IV line. I watched her eyes move toward the window, not looking out of it, just looking in that direction like she needed a horizon, even if it wasn't real. "We'll wait," the nurse said softly, and stepped out. I stayed behind. Neither of us spoke for a while. You don't push a decision like that. Not when you've just been pulled out of one kind of prison and dropped into another. The kind where every memory has to be named, categorized, validated by strangers who will ask again tomorrow in court. Eventually, she nodded. "Yes," she said. "But not just him." Her voice cracked, not from emotion exactly, but from the weight of the sentence itself. The detective assigned to her case was named Carla Monroe. Late 40s, calm demeanor, short sleeves in winter. She spoke gently, but didn't sugarcoat anything. I could tell she'd handled cases like this before too many. She didn't flinch at details. She just asked questions, always letting silence settle before she wrote anything down. Sarah talked for almost 2 hours that first day. About the van, about the house in Idaho, about the names she was told to answer to. "They made you choose a new name?" Carla asked. Sarah nodded. "Only at first," she said. "Then they stopped asking. I just wasn't anything for a while." Gregory Fenton was booked without bail. The initial charges were unlawful confinement and kidnapping. But as Carla peeled back the layers of what had been happening in that cabin, and more importantly, what came before it, things got worse. The House of Grace in Idaho wasn't listed as a treatment center. It wasn't on any national registry. The property had been sold 4 times under different LLCs. The basement, according to Sarah, held beds. At least 28. Each one with a number. No names. She remembered waking up in number 12. Later, she'd overhear the phrase, reclamation, in whispered meetings behind the walls. She didn't know what it meant then. She does now. I don't think I'll ever forget the way she said that. The phrase Reclamation Network showed up in a few scattered documents. Carla dug up coded language in court filings, vague financial transactions, and one sealed settlement involving a different rehab center in Utah that burned down in 2010. Sarah had never been there, but she recognized 2 names listed as employees. One of them was Margaret Harrow, the same woman Sarah remembered being called Sister Grace. Carla tried to track her down, but the address tied to her Idaho license had been cleared out a week before the raid. Whoever ran that place had a head start. Too many, actually. Still, they got one break. In Gregory's cabin, under a floorboard in the back room, they found a tin box with several cassette tapes inside. The handwriting on the labels matched Gregory's. One was dated May 2015. Carla brought in an old recorder from the evidence room, popped the first tape in, and let it run. Sarah and I sat in silence as the audio crackled to life. At first it was just Gregory's voice muttering about schedules, fuel receipts, supply drops. But then one tape changed. A woman's voice this time. Shaky, deliberate. "My name is Lily Saunders," she began. "I was taken from Eugene, Oregon in 2011. If you find this, please tell my mother I had a dog named Buddy. He was real. I am real. Please don't forget me." Sarah covered her mouth with both hands. I didn't know what to say. Carla paused. The recorder looked down and wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked at Sarah. Did you know her? Sarah shook her head. But I remember that name. They whispered it, like a warning. Don't end up like Lily. That was enough. Carla reopened a missing persons file out of Lane County. The photo matched. Same age, same dimples, gone 14 years. Now, maybe not. Gregory refused to talk. No confession, no statement. Not even a request for a lawyer at first. Just silence. Eventually, he scribbled something on a piece of paper and pushed it across the table. It said, "You got the wrong idea. That's all." The only reason charges stuck was because Sarah's story matched the timeline of multiple abandoned properties tied to Margaret Harrow's shell companies. But without Harrow herself or Karen Holloway, the intake coordinator Sarah said helped falsify medical records, the case was shaky. Carla kept pushing. She found an old employee list from a rehab in Coeur d'Alene that had closed down in 2016. Karen's name was there. So was a license number that traced to a facility in Kansas that no longer existed. The press got wind eventually. A local paper ran a headline, "Woman found after 15 years, claims cult-like rehab held her in woods." Sarah didn't like the word cult. She said it made it sound too organized. It was more like grooming, disappearance with paperwork. That phrase stuck with me. It was accurate. These people weren't carving symbols into walls or chanting in robes. They were manipulating families, rewriting identities, controlling records. When you make someone disappear on paper first, it's a lot easier to make them disappear for real. Carla filed a federal motion to transfer the case out of state. She said there were too many agencies involved now, Idaho, Oregon, California, and we hadn't even touched Washington yet. There was a postcard Sarah had kept hidden inside her pillowcase. It was never postmarked, just 3 interlocking circles on the back and a name Red Room. No address, just the words, "You're almost out west," scrawled in shaky black ink. I handed it to Carla. She looked at it for a long time. "Looks like they weren't done with her yet," she said. By the end of the week, Gregory was officially charged in federal court for trafficking across state lines, conspiracy to falsify medical records, and unlawful detainment of a minor with intent to obstruct guardianship. That was just the start. More names were coming. Carla promised us that. Sarah stayed with me and Daniel for the time being. She didn't want to go back to Eugene yet. Too many ghosts there. Instead, she started therapy slowly, cautiously. 1 hour at a time. 1 word at a time. We didn't talk much about what came next. Not yet. The air felt full of unfinished sentences. Carla was still digging. There were photos to identify, documents to unseal, and witnesses to interview. But one night, just before Sarah went to bed, she handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing. Crayon pencil, a little water stain on the edge. It was a picture of a dog under a tree. The dog had a red balloon tied to its collar, and next to it, a little girl stood holding a sign. The words were barely legible for the one who remembers. That's when I knew there were others. There had to be. And we hadn't found them all yet. I still think about the way Sarah looked that morning in the backyard, wrapped in Daniel's old flannel, standing barefoot in the wet grass. She was holding the postcard again, the one with the 3 circles, no stamp, no name. Just that strange message. "You're almost out west." She didn't say anything at first, just traced her thumb along the edge until the paper started to fray. When I asked if she wanted to keep it, she shook her head. "It's not for me anymore," she said. "It was a warning. I just didn't know what direction it meant." We burned it that afternoon piece by piece in the fire pit. She didn't watch the flames. I did. Gregory Fenton pled guilty. No trial, no statement. He signed the paperwork without looking at it. 27 years, no parole. Carla called me the day it went through. "It's not enough," she said, "but it's something." Karen Holloway gave a taped deposition in exchange for federal protection. She named others. More names than I could keep up with. Most were aliases. A few were real. One was a school principal, another a county judge. The House of Grace was only one piece. There were others converted barns, a church basement in Wyoming, an old hotel that never filed taxes. Sarah never went to those places, but someone did. Someone still might be. They found a second girl in Montana. Same initials carved into a beam in the attic. 28. Another drawing taped behind a wall panel. A red balloon, a golden retriever, and a name buddy. This one had a date 2013. No body. Just a shoe and a voice on a cassette that broke halfway through. It was enough to reopen 6 cold cases. Carla transferred to a joint task force. She still sends updates when she can, but I can hear it in her voice how deep this goes, how many stories might never get told. Sarah stayed with us for almost a year. She got a dog. Not a retriever too many memories, but a mutt with ears that never stopped moving. She named him Cedar. She started drawing again. Nothing dark, just quiet things. Trees, windows, dogs curled up in places they feel safe. One day she asked if she could use her real name on the drawings. Not the one they gave her, the one her mother had sewn into a stuffed rabbit she carried as a child. I said yes, of course yes. She signed each one SL, small neat letters in the corner. We held a small memorial that fall, not for anyone we buried, but for the ones still missing. A few of the neighbors came. Carla drove down for it. We tied red balloons to the fence posts and let them go at dusk. Sarah stood beside me and whispered each name she could remember. I whispered them back. The wind carried them somewhere. Sometimes I wonder how many children out there are still trying to be remembered. Hidden in files, mislabeled in databases, taught to answer to names that aren't theirs. Sometimes I wonder how many red rooms still exist. How many doors stay locked until someone asks the right question. But mostly I just sit with what we know. What we finally pulled into the light. Sarah survived. That matters. So do the names she helped us find. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it. Not for us, but for the ones still waiting to be named.